Welcome to the Tenant Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson here with my podcast partner, Wes Brown. And today we are sitting down with Krista Hanley, art coordinator and art event manager for the Coors Western Art Exhibit and Sale at the National Western Stock Show. Krista, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
Talk to me a little bit about what you do as a art coordinator and event manager.
All right. Well, what don't I do, frankly? The Coors Western Art Exhibit is a big Western art exhibit, contemporary Western art at the stock show. And so we have a fine art gallery in the middle of the stock show exhibit hall building. And so my job is to coordinate the artists for our show. And we currently have about 75 artists every year who are in the show. They each can submit from 1 to 6 pieces of art. So I coordinate with them all of the art, getting it into our database, all the photo management, so we can get it on our website. And then we have several large events surrounding the stock show. So our first event is in December. It's for young collectors under 40 or 45, and it's called Young Guns. And we have that event as sort of an opening to almost to the stock show season in December. And this last Young Guns event, we had over 450 people attend that show. And we also do art sales at that. And then our really big event is called the Red Carpet Reception, which is in January, right? The Tuesday before stock show. And that event sees 1,000 to 1,100 people. And we have silent auction items that sell, bid boxes, which I can talk about what that process is, and a lot of art sells on that night. Typically, we will sell 50 to 60% of the art in the show that night. And we've made up to, like this year, I think we made $750,000 just at the red carpet reception.
Wow.
And then we continue to sell that art throughout stock show. So we hang the art in the gallery for stock show, and it's open to the public the whole 16 days of the show. And then I manage all of the shipping afterwards. So getting the art out of the stock show, creating all of that coordination with everything. And then I manage our contracts, commissions with artists, all our finances and our budget.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't the only thing you do. You do stuff outside of this as well. Talk to our listeners about what else you do in addition to all this.
Yeah. So the nice thing about the stock show season is that while it's horrendously busy throughout the fall and winter, I do have a lighter summer. As I'm still planning for the show, but my summers can be a little easier. So I take on other clients during the rest of the summer. So I work with artists to help organize their collection, their work. I've worked with them even digitally to help them organize digital files and manage their sales. And then my love is to work with art collectors. So going in and organizing art collections, cataloging them into a usable database. And I create databases in FileMaker specifically for art collectors. And the goal behind that is that, oftentimes art collectors, they collect, and then they don't quite know what they have, and they want to be able to learn more about it, or they want to see a picture or show someone. They meet someone and they want to be like, oh, look, I just bought this really great thing. And it's really nice to be able to have a database and pull that piece up. I've got one collector I work for right now, and his interest is Colorado history, and he collects old Colorado photography and stereo cards. And part of his love of his collection is where were these photos taken. So that's something we added to its database, is tracking where photos, so he can go in and say, where are all my Longmont photographs? And he can do a search and pull all of those up and find them. And sometimes he'll go and he'll rephotograph the places, much like, that Jackson project. So it's really exciting for me to be able to custom create databases for art collectors in order for them to have more access and different kind of access to their collection. And then the same thing happens, organizing them to go in and be like, what's a logical way that you access your collection? For some collectors I've worked for, like they access it in a certain way. They like have their like cream of the crop pieces that they want to look at all the time, or they want to show people all the time. So it's like, well, it's important that those are accessible, that those are on the top. And then even though there's some photographs or artworks or things that might be in that same genre, but maybe those go in a different shelf because you're not accessing those all the time. And it's more harmful for the art if you're like flipping through them or something. So I like to do that. I like to organize artists and collectors and to create the databases for them.
And it's not, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, do you appraise art as well when you're doing that?
So I also work for an art appraiser, and she's a certified appraiser with the Appraisers Association of America. And so it's other job that I have.
And that's a pretty small group of people, isn't it? Art appraisers, or is there?
Yeah. You have to be, in order to do certain appraisals, like for that are like estate appraisals when someone passes away or there's a divorce or something that might go to court, you need to have a certified appraiser do that appraisal, because if it does go to court, you really need someone who knows the ethics and the methodology behind appraising. And this is a fairly new thing for me to start assisting this appraiser. And I think this is another track that I eventually may go down, is to get my certification to do appraisals. And that's something else perhaps that I can offer clients, collector clients.
Now, you have a fine arts background in photography, is that right?
Yes.
So talk a little bit about your education and your education background.
So my undergraduate degree is in photography. I have a BFA in photography from the College of Santa Fe, which is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is now unfortunately closed.
Oh, wow.
It's a now defunct school. So, but I grew up in Colorado, actually, and my photography teacher knew about the College of Santa Fe, had some former students go there, and thought that would be a good place for me to go. I also had some family ties to New Mexico, so it was a logical place for me to go. I think I wanted to get out and experience the art world in a different way. And so I went to Santa Fe. I got my degree in in photography, and I stayed in Santa Fe for 6 years after college, because that art scene in Santa Fe is so rich. And it was actually, I was in school, I went with the goal to get a degree in photography, but my sophomore year, I got a job with a big art collector in Santa Fe. My teachers recognized me as someone who was organized and who was type A, which is sort of sometimes hard to find in art students. And they had an art collector that they knew whose collection manager was leaving, and they recommended me to that job. And he hired me on right there when I was a sophomore. And that's when I became fascinated by the idea of collection management, gallery management. And I think probably if there had been a pathway at the College of Santa Fe toward that, I probably would have shifted. But as it was, I was sort of headed down this path to be a photographer. So I kept that path, even though my job, it just felt from then on, was really more toward the art and collection management track.
It sounds fun, because not only are you helping organize people, but you're also kind of getting into the head of the collector, like you kind of already emphasized, and figuring out how their brain works and how they organize things. So that's got to be kind of fun, trying to figure out how to best organize their collection for them to easily access what they're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I love, collectors' brains. It's fascinating to me of why people collect, what they collect. and what their passions are and how that comes out in an art collection. I think everyone will collect differently, and everyone has different reasons for collecting. And I think that's really interesting. And it's like there's almost an art to collecting, and there's a creativity to it. You don't just collect everything that you come across. You pick a path. You pick, I want to collect, I worked with a lot of collectors in Santa Fe that were photography. They collected photography. And so you pick photography, and then what kind of photography? What photographers do you just love and you want to support? And then if you're collecting paintings, like you have to pick. So you pick who you support, and that's fascinating to me of why you're doing that and how that becomes a cohesive collection that then, most collectors, they run out of space on their walls, but they're still buying and they're still collecting. And it's like, so it's not just about displaying something, there's something more to it. And I'm talking about collectors who are collecting for reasons beyond investment. There's, I know that that's a big reason a lot of people collect, but it's not the only reason. I think there has to be more to it than that. Like there's a reason to spend it, and it's beyond potentially making money in the future, and it's beyond hanging it on the wall. There's like this ownership of that object that becomes important. And I love to think about why that is.
So do you find that collectors automatically pick a path, or are you there to help them pick a path? Like, because I could see, like, if I was collecting art, especially since we've talked to a lot of artists, I always like, ooh, I'd like to have that. And but they're all different,
Mm-hmm.
So I could see being kind of eclectic in a sense that I like this, I'm going to buy this one and this one. But then when you're looking at a pathway, they don't really relate. So do you ever go in and say, I suppose you don't really guide their collecting, but you just kind of see a pathway? Maybe we automatically pick a pathway.
I think we ought, and it sounds like you do have a pathway. It's artists that you've worked with that you have an affinity toward. I think that's your pathway. For you, it's that connection that you had with that artist, that you met them and you talked to them. Okay. And then you were like, oh, I want to support you. I want one of your pieces. I like that.
It's not just like picking like, oh, I'm going to collect impressionist art or abstract art.
Yeah. Okay. And so for a lot of people, maybe that is, like for me, I worked with a lot of artists, in Santa Fe and I buy pieces from them because I have a connection to them. I like them. And to me, that's my collection. The core of my collection is artists that I've worked with and value as people and then as artists. Right. So that can be a pathway too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, and then to answer the other side of that question, sometimes collectors will come to me and we'll have a conversation about what they should collect or if they should add something to their collection. And, I'll look at the piece and evaluate it and give them my opinion. And of course, they are the ultimate person who has an opinion, but I can look at it for condition. I can look at, some things to see, my opinion is if it fits in their collection. Does it fit on their wall? I had one collector that was really concerned about it. He wanted to display most of his collection, and we would have this like rotation schedule sort of seasonally of like here are the spring pictures and here are the fall pictures and here are the Christmas pictures. And so for him, it was like, oh, I need more spring. Will this fit into my spring collection?
Oh, that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. And a lot of my job was like sort of curating his house seasonally and taking pictures down and putting new ones up and deciding what would hang during different seasons.
Yeah, as a layman, I wouldn't even thought that was like a career. Yeah. Not, and obviously you do a lot of other things, but that's just like a way to diversify your income is like, I have these collectors that I can, get charged to help them with their collections. Like I said, when I read that, your little bio on the website, that one kind of struck out at me as like the whole appraisal of art and how that looks. And then I researched and I ran across a website, like the guy's an impressionist appraiser and there's like 27 in the world or something like that. It was just kind of fascinating. So I was really curious about that whole deal.
Yeah. So appraisers have to have knowledge of the subject matter that they focus on. So you can't just be a art appraiser and appraise anything from impressionist to contemporary art, unless you have proven that you have a knowledge base in all of that genre. But mostly appraisers will focus, and goes for like antique appraisers too, or furniture appraisers. They will specialize, and you see that on Antiques Roadshows.
Right.
They have the roadshow. They have the appraisers that, the furniture guy and the photography person and the whoever the painting person.
So as you're going through this process of being an appraiser, so do you have a pathway of like what is your kind of expertise going to be or is?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I'm thinking about it, but photography is one thing that, because I have this degree in photography, and when I lived in Santa Fe, I worked at the Andrew Smith Gallery, which is at the time was one of the biggest photography galleries in Santa Fe, and they dealt with 19th and 20th century photography. And so for a long time I worked there. We sold Ansel Adams, we sold the photo succession, like that whole historical and some contemporary photographers. And so I think I have a really good knowledge base about photography and collecting photography. But I work at the stock show, and this is 7 years now that I've worked there. And so I also have a good knowledge of the contemporary Western market.
So who's your favorite photographer when you're looking at collections? Do you have one? I mean, I'm a huge Ansel Adams fan. Because,
Ansel Adams.
I mean,
who doesn't like Ansel?
Exactly.
Well, some people don't like Ansel Adams.
Edward Weston is I'm a big fan of.
Yes, exactly. The reason I wanted to be a photographer back in high school was finding Imogen Cunningham's work. So she was a modernist, F-64, and but they beautiful floral flower photography. And I had an affinity with that. And that's who I wanted to be. So I went to college thinking, I'm going to be Imogen Cunningham. And then what did I end up taking pictures of? My BFA thesis project was 30 by 40 color photographs of insects. So like I think of myself as like the Imogen Cunningham of bugs.
Love that. That's awesome. There is a connection. Flowers and bugs.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's why I started photographing bugs, is because they were always on the flowers. And then somehow it just turned into just bugs. So
it's funny how that journey kind of happens, how it just evolves. You kind of start down this path, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm going to photograph bugs.
Right.
I kind of like this.
So I want to talk about education a little bit. So how do you rate your education at Santa Fe? Was it everything you wanted, or did you see deficiencies that you wish it would have been a little different? Or
the College of Santa Fe, as an art school, it was a liberal arts art school. So we did have to do a lot of pretty heavy track of liberal arts classes. And that's, I think, where it was the most deficient is, like, for instance, like I didn't have to take math, but I had to take 2 religion classes.
Oh, really?
And
wow.
I had, I had to take science and philosophy and religion and English, but it was but there was no math in there, which is maybe one of the reasons I went to the College of Santa Fe.
That's why I would go.
Right. And so for that, I feel like that part of my degree could have been a little stronger. And they kept changing the pathways. So when I was a freshman, I sort of locked myself in, but like halfway through, they were like starting to do these classes where they were combining things. They would combine like English and science and trying to teach, I think, in a more holistic way.
Right.
But I never went on that path because, I was always, sort of locked in. The art classes there were phenomenal. They're the artists, living and working artists in Santa Fe were teaching the classes. So I took drawing and painting classes from artists. My photography teachers were absolutely phenomenal. And, on the other hand, I was always sort of mixed media, and I was very interested in book arts.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of wanted to really delve into that. And I found that a little difficult. I wanted to do more of that creative book arts and combining art and photography and writing and poetry. And I found that a little harder because of the way the structure of the school was. I think most of the teachers were a little bit more of the straight photography and almost toward documentary photography. And then while we did have like a non-traditional practices, like non-silver department and path, that was one of the teachers out of the many that I had to take classes from. And I think that's why I ended up with bugs instead of artist books. But I think with a little bit more of a flexible program, I would have ended up with a thesis of artist books with photography and non-silver and writing and poetry and stuff interwoven.
Okay. So now let's compare and contrast maybe the master's program, which you went to in Gunnison, right? Western Colorado. Is that in Gunnison?
Yes, in Gunnison. It was an online degree that I did in gallery management. You
know, I've been to Gunnison. I've been through there, and I would have never picked museum and gallery management degree in Gunnison. I mean, I was surprised. So talk about that program, the MFA program. How was that? Yeah,
so it's a master's in gallery management and exhibition specialization is the official name of it. And it's a fairly new degree. I think it's maybe only 4 or 5 years old at this point. And I graduated last May. So I started like a year after it had gotten underway. And the reason I sort of felt to it is one of our patrons and a former committee member for the Coors Western Art Exhibit is highly involved with Crested Butte and Gunnison and Western University, and knew about this program and was recommending that I do it because she saw that what I was doing with the Coors show, and she thought there would be an affinity and that maybe I would get something out of this program for my job. You know, that was sort of like, oh, you can help the National Western by getting this degree. So that's how I learned about it. And then I really, it made sense for me because I'm a working professional and this was an almost all online degree, pretty flexible in how many classes you could take. And it had sort of the lowest hour requirements as sort of similar degrees. So I was looking at the same time as at DU's degree that they have in cultural management. I was looking at some other online degrees, but this one it made sense for me. It was affordable. The requirements were less, and because it's online, they're working with professionals all over the country. So I had teachers who were in Kansas City and in New York and in Crested Butte, but like all over. And that was really cool, that idea that I was really working with professionals in the field all over the country.
So a little bit more geared to that as opposed, and this makes sense because it's a master's as opposed to a bachelor's, but you didn't have to take those peripheral classes. No. These are really career-focused classes.
Yeah,
right?
So what's great about that degree is they sort of are preparing you to do what you want to do in this realm. So they have business classes that you have to take, so the art market, and you learn about the art market from historically, and as if you were to work for a gallery or start your own gallery, you learn about curating, and you curate shows, and you learn about gallery management, and you learn about museum management and museum studies, and sort of you learn about all these tracks. And then you sort of pick what's fascinating to me or what really works. And for me, it worked because my job at the Coors show is I'm managing a gallery that's sort of a for-profit. We want to sell art. We want to create art sales. But we're a nonprofit. The National Western is a nonprofit. We're supporting the Scholarship Trust. So there's a lot of nonprofit things. We have to be really careful with budget and all of that. And so there's the business side, and then there's curating. And I curate a show for the Young Guns event in December. And we do a little pop-up show that I've started curating of local artists. So my curatorial path in my degree really helped me be able to wisely curate for an audience.
That Young Guns show, was that your idea to start that?
So the Young Guns started I think the year that I started, or maybe the year before, there was a committee member on the Coors Western Art Committee who said, we need to start to appeal to a younger audience. That, the National Western audience and the Coors Western Art audience, they're getting older. They're not collecting as much anymore. And so we need to think about, like, how do we bring in younger people? And so she went to them and said, let's start an event. Let's start an event and start to have younger people geared toward them, to have them come in. And that started, and I think it was like 40 people came, and like 7 or 8 years ago. Right?
So so I just want clarification from me. Sorry. When we're talking young guns, are they the artists that are young or the collectors that are young?
So the both? Idea is that the collectors are younger, and gotcha. We want to bring in those younger collectors and sort of show them, what art collecting is about. And there's like, no, you don't have to become collectors. So we had that, we started it. And then throughout the years, the event has changed. So before it was sort of like a gallery opening, and we had some art on the walls for them that they could purchase. And then it sort of evolved, and they have a very highly involved committee of people that are in their under 40, very highly involved, who have shifted the feel of that event. And now that event, it's grown to over 450 people. Wow. And now that event has the show that I do, the pop-up show that I do, is younger artists. So I am curating artists that are in their 20s through 30s, and that they're local. So my idea is, like, what do we like about collecting? It's meeting the artist, talking to the artist, learning the story about that artwork. And that can happen even better when they're in that same age demographic. And these artists need help too. There's not a lot of shows that are looking specifically for younger, more emerging artists without gallery representation. And so that's what I'm looking for. And it's also, supporting artists in this, very sort of interesting place. You don't expect art at the National Western Stock Show. You expect to see cows and horses, right? And I really love that aspect, is like there's so much room for art in different places. And the stock show is really a cool place to say you had a show there.
It is a really phenomenal show. I was really impressed with what I saw there this year.
I was blown away. Yeah.
It's not what you expect.
Mm-mm.
Talk to me about how important that relationship with the artist is for people that are collecting.
Yeah. So we have the Young Guns event, and then we have the red carpet event. And we tell artists, come and be at the events. You'll sell more art. People love to talk to artists. They love it. They love to hear about the art. They want to meet artists. And I think that relationship is really important, between the buyer and the artist. I think that relationship is really special, and it's really important because you're fostering something between that. You're supporting an artist in a way, but it's supporting that conversation of, what is an artist doing? How do they think? And then why do you want to buy that? You have a connection there. I want to buy this piece because I learned about it from the artist. I could picture the artist standing on the side of the river and painting this in plein air. And that conversation, that connection, I think is really important. Does that answer the question?
No, yeah, okay. Perfectly, actually. Because we've had this discussion we talked to an artist yesterday. He's written this phenomenal book, but he really emphasized to us, and we've heard this from other artists, that relationship between him and the people that buy his art and collect his art is really important. And I think people overlook that a lot of times, or they don't think about it. So I think that's a pretty essential thing that as an artist, you need to keep in mind that, yeah, you might be creating in your studio and you kind of work in your little microcosm, but it's really important to develop those relationships. Being able to, you might be introverted, but you need to learn how to communicate not only your ideas with the written word so that people can relate to your art, but also do events like this red carpet event and get out there and talk to the public about what you do and the thought behind your art.
And I think that's partly why our event is so successful, is because we want the artists there, we have the artists there for the most part. I think that helps us have these huge sales at the red carpet. If it was just like a gallery opening and the artists weren't there, I don't know that our sales would be so strong. It really does help when the artist is there and they're able to, and the artist is able to talk about their work. And I know that's hard. It's really hard. It's hard to talk about yourself. I mean, basically it's putting you up there and telling you to talk about yourself, but artists really should practice that. Practice talking about their work. And it does not have to be, we had to write so many artist statements in school. Every project had to have an artist statement accompanied, and then you learn, how to use the word juxtapose, right? But it doesn't have to, you don't have to talk about your work that way. Just telling little stories about, where you were and what you were thinking when you created this piece, the way you work with the medium. That's important. People are fascinated by that. We have an artist who works in clay in our show, and people love her work. And there's some sort of affinity that she has with the medium. And so she talks about the medium and why is that medium important? I mean, I think, you can talk about it at the most simple level and people will connect with you.
So you do the curating side. You can help collectors. You can help organize collections, and you've done a multitude of things for the Coors Western art exhibit, but you also work with artists as well. And tell me some of the things that you can do to help and that you have done to help artists.
Yeah, so I love to work with artists because I want artists to be successful. Like I talked about, that goal is to bring artists and collectors together. And I feel like I can help artists get a little bit further into that relationship. And really, the traditional way the art world works now is who's between artists and collectors. It's galleries or shows, group shows. So you have to be able to get into galleries. You have to be able to get into these group shows in order to meet the buyers, in order to get your work seen or sold. And again, this is there's a lot of ways to be an artist. So this is the traditional way of being an artist. And then beyond that, I'm not even talking about, artists that are doing performance work or installation work, and we can talk about that too. But for artists who are interested in the traditional way of working, I can really help them, just get organized, be organized with your work physically and be organized online, make sure your website's current. Sometimes we look at applications for the Coors Art Show and we want to see more work. And then we get on their website and they haven't updated their website since 2016. And it's like, well, what are you making now? We want to see what might be in our show. So get your website current, get your, paintings like in your studio. Like, can you find a painting? If the curator comes and says, I want to see your work, what are you working on? What does that space physically look like? Can you be organized enough to show your work to the curator? I can help artists with pricing. I think this is sometimes a struggle for emerging artists. They see work on the walls of galleries or in shows, and it's at this level, and they think automatically they can be at that level. And I like to talk artists through why, how to start pricing, because you can't ever go backwards. You have to really be cautious when you start pricing and you start selling your work, because you can't sell something to someone for $2,000 and then when things don't sell for $2,000, you lower your price to $1,000. Well, that one person who bought the thing at $2,000 is never going to collect your work again. They're going to feel like a chump. So you have to be cautious when you start to price yourself. And I like to talk artists through that conversation. The other thing is just how to approach shows and galleries. What do you do? What are the ethics of that? What are the guidelines that you should follow? It's sometimes as this art coordinator, so I'm positioned in between the artist and the curator when we're at the point of the application process. And I have so many artists calling me and asking questions about our show, and they are easily accessible online. And so do your due diligence. Read the website, read the artist application guidelines before you call someone, because my job is huge. And it's, while I I don't mind talking to artists, but I also want artists to know that like I question how are they going to be to work with if they can't find basic information online? Like, are they not going to read my contract? And then, and this happens a lot. They don't read their contract and they send me emails about what's my commission rate. And I'm like, it's like the first paragraph in your contract, but you're emailing me about it. And I'm so busy. And if they can't read their contract and can't figure out what they're getting paid, then do I know that they're going to follow our deadlines and get their art to us on time? And they don't. They don't follow our deadlines and they don't get their art to us on time. And what does that do? That means the whole show installation is delayed because we have one artist who didn't read their contract, who didn't read the timeline, who didn't follow through. In a show with 75 artists and everything is backed up because of one artist not reading, to me, that looks bad. You shouldn't be that artist. You shouldn't be that artist that can't follow deadlines and read their contract. You should be the best artist. You should be the gold star artist that does everything on time to the letter of the contract. And that makes you a pleasure to work with as someone who coordinates a show. I love those artists that do it on time, that get it to me. And, and invariably, like, I want to work with you more. I'll ask you back, or the curator will ask you back because we had a good experience working with you.
I don't think artists think that way,
No.
and I would imagine, and this is painting with a very broad brush, but, they're not that detailed kind of thing. They want to create art. They're not about contracts. And we just did a podcast a few weeks ago with Peggy Detmers and hers, she had a big contract with Kevin Costner. So we talked about like the pitfalls of contracts and know what you're getting into and sometimes it still works against you. But I think it's so important for somebody like you to tell these artists that's listening to our show that, you got to read your contract. You have to understand it, and it's going to make the experience so much better.
It is. And what it does is it makes that curator want to work with you. So the curator for the Coors Western Art Exhibit is Rose Frederick, and she does other shows. And the artists that she wants to support artists that's what curators do. And she has other shows, not just the Coors show. So she has a good experience with you at the Coors show and something else comes up in her life as a curator that your work would be a good fit. She might think of you because you were good to work with. And she might not want, I don't want to, assume anything, but it's when artists are harder to work with, it's harder for curators to want to work with them again. Mm-hmm. And, so just think about that. And if you need someone to help you get organized, and even if it's just a friend or your spouse or something that to
or
ask
you,
them, right? Or me, but just to say, like at the very basics, what do I need to think about when I look at a contract? I would say print your contract out and get a highlighter. And highlight those important things, like what's your commission rate? What are the deadlines? The other thing is what do they ask of you for when the art arrives? Does it need to have hanging hardware on it? Does it need to be, how does it need to be presented when it arrives at the space? And for the most part, it needs to be in hanging ready condition. Like we don't want to put hooks on your frames. Like we're scared we'll ruin it. And we don't have the time to do that. So you need to pay attention to that. And so get that contract out, highlight the things that you need to keep track of, highlight those deadlines, and then put those deadlines on your calendar. And, and not just art is due on the 25th, but maybe on the a month before, say, do I have the art ready that's due for it? Am I, getting my stuff to the framer? Framers always have delays. Almost always. So really plan for that. Plan for the framer to not have your frames in stock. And so plan even further ahead. And I know this means you have to paint even further ahead or do your work even further ahead. And that, but that's what makes you a successful artist is if you have all your ducks in a row. It's not just creating the art. I mean, I'm sorry, you can be the best artist in the world, but I'm not going to continue to want to work with you if you don't show up on time. And yes, some of the best artists that we have in the show don't show up on time. So I'm not saying that that's we won't work with you, but I'm saying it's harder to work with you.
So be professional.
Be professional.
Is what it boils down to.
Definitely.
And be prepared.
And one other thing is shipping. If you have to ship your work, learn how to package and ship art, or hire someone to ship your work. That's how things get damaged. You don't want your art damaged. When it arrives at a show, you don't want it to arrive needing repairs, because how does that takes time out of our installation schedule, trying to figure out and to coordinate with you, because you have to pay for those repairs because you didn't ship it right. So we have to coordinate with you how to get your frame repaired, or how to get those scuffs off your painting, or we have to coordinate with you to revarnish. We have very tight deadlines, and we have things worked out. Every day has a task. And if we have to, all of a sudden, we have to take something to the framer because it got damaged in shipping, it's like throws us off. And our opening date is never changing. It is set in stone. I could tell you when our opening is for the 2025 Coors Western Art Show. Like, that is never changing. We can't be flexible about that. So ship your art, figure out how to ship it. Buy those, I know they're expensive, those float crates, those cardboard boxes that can be reused, or you can make boxes. It just takes a little bit of time and, cardboard and foam. You can learn how to do that. But, I've had artists that have shipped, paintings that are like taped together and stuck in a giant box of peanuts. And by the time it comes to us, the paintings are half out of a hole in the box, and it's like, that doesn't look good. And it scares me.
So what other things can artists be better about? Or what other tips can you give artists that are trying to get in exhibitions or into galleries? What are some of the other tricks of the trade?
Yeah. So when you're applying, like following those application deadlines and guidelines, so reading through that and educate yourself about the show. So, the Coors Western Art Exhibit, we really are looking for artists to support. I think we're sort of a different show. We want to support artists. So when we look at your application, and our applications are open right now, when we're looking at your application, we're looking at work. It doesn't have to be what you would put in the show. We want to see your best work. And so it's not just work that you think might be Western. Don't paint for what you think a Western audience might want, or what the stock show audience, if you're like painting photographs of cows because you think that that's what should be in the stock show, instead of you paint cows all the time and that's why you're a fit in our show, that might not work. So don't paint for us. And I would say this is for most shows. Don't create work for that show because it doesn't look genuine. It doesn't look authentic. Create work that you want to create. Create your best work that like your soul is guiding you to. And then figure out where you fit. And then apply for those shows that you think you fit in because of that work that you're creating, that you're guided to create. And I would say that's my biggest tip is sometimes we have artists that get into our show because we picked them for the kind of work that they applied with and that we saw on their website and then, they painted for our show and all of a sudden they're painting cows when they've never painted cows before. And it doesn't sell. The audience sees that. They see that like this is your first cow painting and it doesn't sell. And then the artist goes back to like just painting what they want to paint. And the next year they sell out. And the audience can tell. That's like my biggest tip, really. The other things artists can do is, with pricing, the same thing. We've had artists, they have prices in galleries, they have prices that they're selling their work for. And then all of a sudden they get into the Coors show and their prices go up. And again, We know that because we're looking at your market, and we put you in the show because you were at a certain rate, because we thought we could sell you at that rate. And then if your prices all of a sudden went up, we can't sell you anymore because we know our audience and we know our market. And so your art won't sell. And you thought, oh, here, I'm in the Coors show. They sell so much art. I'll definitely sell for these higher prices and I'll make a bunch of money off these people. But it doesn't happen. And it ends up where you don't sell anything. And I would say caution that across the line. You get into just be cautious of your pricing. You have to be consistent. In this digital era, people know. People know what you're selling for. And don't undercut your galleries. If you have a gallery or you have a show like ours, and then there's people calling you and saying, oh, I want to see your work, and then you sell it for half price, like, we know you're doing that and you're selling out from under our show. So why would we have you in our show anymore? Because we're not going to sell to that person anymore. That person went to you, they went to your studio, they bought your work for half price. They're not going to come and support the Coors show and support our scholarship trust.
That kind of reminds me of Michael Unteed. He was saying sometimes he'll have somebody come to him and buy art directly from him, which he's fine selling to, but then he sends the commission to the galleries.
Yes. And that it should be standard. I think a lot of artists don't know that. And so I'm going to tell you that. Like, that should be standard. If you have someone who says, hey, I saw your work at this gallery or at this show, and that's fine if you sell your work to them, but do send that commission to the gallery, send that commission to our show, and alert them that this is the client that saw you there, so that they know like, oh, this client is actively buying your work. And so we can still market to that client, but it's really, it's only fair if the person saw your work at that place that we're doing a lot of sales. We try to sell your work. We work really hard to sell. That's our whole goal.
Well, that's
the whole
your job.
Goal of a gallery.
Right,
that's our job. Like, galleries, that's their goal, their job. And so, to then sell out of your gallery, but to not tell us and not to give the commission, it makes you look unprofessional again. And
we'd had some conversation with other artists about when they work with nonprofits and nonprofits want it for free. And then, the thing is if you give it away for free and they undersell it, it affects the gallery prices. Yes. So I mean, and that's something I never thought about until we started having these conversations with artists. I got a quick question. I want to my granddaughter is 19, or it's going to be 19. Ooh. Anyway, and I think she's still trying to figure out, she wants to be a videographer, but if she wanted to be a curator and do an appraiser and that kind of stuff that you're doing, what would you recommend young people that want to get into this kind of work? What would you recommend them to do?
I mean, I think like the formal path of it is to become an art historian. Like, okay. If you want to be a museum curator and go that track, you have to sort of start that art historian path. And typically museum curators have PhDs in a, specialization of art history. But, I think there's also a lot of opportunity for curators who are, doing alternative things. Like, you can curate online shows. I know no one's going to ask for your master's degree or your PhD if you're curating online. For me, what's really exciting is alternative spaces and artist residencies and things like that. There's so many ways to put art in unexpected places, in public places, that, you don't probably need that formal education. You should research what you want to do and how you want to do it, and talk to people about how they're doing it. Artists, to me, there's some such exciting things happen with artists in the public space right now, and artists in government spaces, and nonprofits that are supporting artists in different ways. And I think that there's so much flexibility that you just have to find like the thing that you want to do, and then figure out how to do it and talk to artists about it. To me, like, sometimes that can be a disconnect, is people want to do things with artists and they want to support artists, but they're never talking to artists.
Right.
So, and it's out of the goodness of their heart, they want to support artists, but they don't really know what artists need because they've never actually really talked to the artists. And artists are problem solvers. I mean, there's no bigger problem than a blank canvas. Talk to the problem solvers. They're the best at figuring out what you can do with limited resources.
I told Rose this, and I think you guys have the greatest job. I love what you guys do, because this is so cool. I would have never thought this as a career path, but what you guys are doing is cool.
Yeah,
I love
it just
it.
happened by accident. I think my career path.
I think that happens to most of us.
Right?
You know, I worked for a nonprofit for 10 years, and actually I have a nonprofit now that I currently do civic education programs, but I would have never thought when I got out of the Marine Corps that I was going to be working for a nonprofit later. You know, so it's been, your life is kind of goes and cool things happen.
Right, exactly. Yeah, just being open. Like, I never would have thought I would have been working at the stock show.
Right.
Like, never in a million years.
Yeah.
Like, you know, coming from Santa Fe, working in contemporary art galleries and the photography gallery in Santa Fe, and then coming to Denver and what's the art job that I found? It was at the stock show of all places.
Right.
Never would have thought it.
But man, what a cool, and I'm speaking from my perception, what a cool thing.
Yeah.
That I think you're lucky once again. That's my perception. So, yeah.
So I want to talk about art residencies.
Yeah.
And I know that you have interest in that and that you've done research because you did your thesis, right, for your master's.
Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what that could mean for an artist?
Yeah. So I really encourage artists to look into artist residencies, to doing residencies. And, or that's another thing that I could talk to artists individually about. But artist residencies, again, like, I'm so passionate about them because they are really a way, in some ways, some artist residencies, they're a way for artists to have space and time. Like, that's the traditional idea of a residency is artists get, they get an artist studio space, out in a great location, and they have time. They don't have to do their job they can take a month off or a year off and just create art in a space. And some residencies have some like work requirements. You might have to, from anything from teaching in schools or teaching workshops to doing presentations of your work to working on a farm, right? Like, there's so many different kinds of residencies they might have that. And then there's other residencies. I just started a residency at the stock show 2 years ago. And our residency at the National Western, it takes place during the stock show. So the 16 days that the stock show is going on. And it definitely is not time to get away. And, because of the nature of the stock show with hundreds of thousands of people, that residency to me is exposure, not just for the artist to sort of be creating work in a public place and have people looking at what you're creating, but it's also exposure of an audience to art and to maybe a different kind of art. So my goal behind the stock show artist residency is that I'm getting fairly contemporary artists who are doing, working in contemporary media or doing different things with media that are not what's necessarily in the Coors Western art exhibit. So the artist that we had the first year, her name was Eileen Rosina Richardson, and she did film, 8mm film, and she filmed around the stock show in our yards where all the cattle are tied up. And she's working on this movie that she did in mostly black and white and some color. And that was really exciting for me to think that we have sort of this, it's a contemporary look with this older medium. And for her, she had so many conversations with people out in the yards and about the history of the stock show and why they're coming. And that was really cool. It was a way of engagement because people recognized her camera and they wanted to know what she was doing. This year's artist was Sarah Wallace Scott, and she's a contemporary artist working in paper media. So she does these beautiful contemporary sculptures in paper. And she's really interested in agriculture and soil health. And so for me, that was like the perfect correlation as I like interested in soil health and the new National Western Center when it becomes like we're hopefully becoming a center of things like this, thinking about water health and soil health and farming practices. And so she sat, Sarah Wallace Scott, she sat and she created and sculpted right there with, these hundreds of thousands of people walking by. So it's not getting away and having space, but it's exposing you to a different audience and exposing a different audience to you. Some tips about art, there's a lot of resources online for artists to look at artist residencies, and just start applying, start looking at what their applications are. And artist residencies, so I'm going to talk a little bit about, so there's residencies that artists have to pay for. And I would say, unless you want a vacation where you get an art studio, like you would pay to go travel somewhere, I would be hesitant to encourage artists to do that. I don't think artists should be paying for residencies necessarily. There's some residencies where the artist doesn't really have to pay, or it's very low, maybe they just pay to get there. And those are great. So if you have the resources to stop working and you can live and feed yourself for that duration of that residency, that can be great, because again, it's giving you either exposure or time away. And then there's residencies that are actually giving the artists a stipend. And that's what I believe that the process should be. I think artists should get paid for their, artists should get paid for their time. They should get paid for what they're doing, because they are providing something. There is a benefit to the institution and a benefit to the audience by having an artist there. And so the artist should benefit too. The artist should, be paid for what they're doing. I firmly believe that. And so that artists, when they start looking, like there are so many residencies that are just like, oh, come to our residency. It's only $100 a night. And it's like, well, I might as well go get a hotel room for that. So just be cautious as you start to look, but there's really exciting residencies out there. And then think about like, what kind of residency do you want? Do you want some of the residencies that really are like time and space away? Or do you want a residency that gives you exposure to something different and something new? There's residencies all over. I think that in Paonia, there's one in a thrift store. There's one in a recycle plant somewhere. There was for a while, there was a container ship residency where like the artist was like lived on the container ship as it, moved across the ocean. There was one of the best, I think most successful residencies was actually at the Twin Towers. And they had a really, the World Trade Center had this great artist residency where they had artists like working in an office space in the middle of the building. And it went on for quite a while. And I think that was fascinating to me when I started researching residencies in order to do this stock show one. That's definitely the kind of residency that is not giving you really time and space away, but it's giving people access to an artist in a different place. There's airport residencies. I think the LaGuardia has a residency. The Mall of America has a residency. Amtrak has a writer residency. So you sit on Amtrak and you write. Like, it's so exciting.
Yeah,
like
Custer State Park in South Dakota has a residency.
Yeah, so there's a lot of national parks and state parks that have residencies. And that's a really good program for artists to look into. That's really exciting. The other thing to caution artists. So even though I would love to have the work that, like, if we had a painter as our artist in residence, even though I would love to be able to like have one of their pieces, that is not what an artist residency is about. The residency is for that artist to create, and the residency should not be asking an artist either to complete something, so I'm not asking them to say, what's your created finished product. I would love them to have a finished product, but that shouldn't be what it's about. It's giving you a different place to work. And especially for the stock show, it's only 16 days. So you can't really create too much in that time period. That's like a finished product. So be cautious about residencies that are asking for work, unless, like, I think the National Park Program that does ask for a piece of work that they then auction off to help fund the program. So that's one thing if it's a cause, but for the most part, your work should be yours. Maybe making sure that you're taking pictures of that work and sharing that with the venue. That's really important to me, that I have that record of who the artist was and what they were creating on site. So that's one thing. And then artists just really working on why they want to do that residency. So when you find the one that you want to apply to, in order to get it, how do you do that application? And being really clear about like this, it's not just time and space away. Why is it this location? Why is this location meaningful for me? So for me, I'm looking at artists that know what the stock show is. You know, it's hard for me to pick artists for our residency that have never been to the stock show, because to me, it's like you have to know what you're dealing with. You have to know that there's cows and horses and hundreds and thousands of people, and there's allergens in the air, and it can be cold and it can be snowy and muddy. Like, you have to know what it is before you apply for us. And other residencies definitely would be different, that you don't have to have been there. But I think you have to have a really clear goal of why you're applying.
Wow. That's fantastic information.
I am so passionate about
I can tell. And
if anyone wants to start a residency, I am here to advise.
That's fantastic.
For a small fee.
Yes.
So we're going to wrap this up. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I think it would be really nice to have you back on again sometime and talk more about all this. If you're a collector and need help with your collection, if you're a gallery and need someone to help curate, or if you're an artist and you need help getting your art life organized, check out Krista's website at kristahanley.com. That's www.kristahanley.com. And as always, I'll have all that info in the episode description. And so, for Todd Pearson
and Wes Brown,
this is Tenant.